Guest speaker is Marie Cosgrove. She's an author and an entrepreneur. Marie is a business mastermind and motivational speaker. Her book, Greater Fortune, and I believe we have a couple of copies here today, wonderfully illustrates how setbacks and hardships can be used to help propel us forward. In addition, Marie is a strong defender of life. Please join us in welcoming Marie Cosgrove.
I'm honored to be here as a guest speaker in front of all of y'all, and I'm often asked to speak on how I bought the company that fired me. But one time when I was asked to speak about that and share my story, I had a dream and God said, "This isn't your story, this is your story." And I never really shared it publicly because it was considered a shameful story. But it is a very powerful story about the power of prayer, the power of faith, and everyone who comes out here and prays know that your prayers never go unanswered. And I learned a lot from this story in my life, and it has given me strength. I never saw it that way growing up, but I'll share this with you. In 1969, on New Year's Day, my grandfather Johnny and his wife Frances, my grandmother, were traveling to Mexico to a wedding. And they had my mother along with her. On the way over there, they were traveling from McAllen, Texas to Mexico. It was a dark night, raining, thunderstorms, and they were driving on a road known as the Devil's Spine. It's still considered one of the most dangerous treks today. Well, he crashed and my mother's head was crushed. It was 24 hours later before someone came and rescued and offered help. Now, there were people that would stop by, but they looted everything. They took all of their suitcases, my grandmother's purse, everything was stolen. So that's the only reason they stopped by. Finally, when someone stopped, it was a pickup truck, and they took them to the closest hospital. At the hospital, the doctors said, it's really amazing that your daughter is still alive, because her head is completely crushed and there's bleeding in the brain, and there's no way she's going to make it much longer. So my grandmother, Frances, said, "Well, do surgery to stop the bleeding in the brain." And the doctor says, "You don't understand. We don't have a surgeon here who's qualified to do that type of surgery. Besides, it's going to take another day for a surgeon to come in, and by the time he gets here, she's going to be dead. And even if we were to perform the surgery now, she would probably die on the operating table or be a vegetable the rest of her life." Well, my grandmother had unshakable faith. And she says, "You bring a surgeon now. I don't care what it takes. You're gonna bring him in." And the doctors just thought she was nuts, because there's no way she's gonna make it. She's gonna be dead. But they did. They called in a surgeon. They brought him in, and they did the surgery. She survived the surgery, but she remained in a coma. After a few months, the doctors said, "We're gonna have to pull the plug because there's no sign of recovery." My grandmother called all her family and friends and said, "Pray." And she asked the doctors for one more day. And that night, she got on her knees and she prayed and prayed. The next morning, my mother opened her eyes. Now, she still had brain damage, but she was going home. During her recovery, she had to learn how to walk, talk, and how to do everything all over again. And during that recovery time, she was raped. And the rape resulted in a pregnancy. The doctor said there's no way that she can carry a child having brain damage and being on all the medications that she was on. In addition, having a child out of wedlock back in that time period was a very shameful thing, especially among Hispanic families. It was a shameful thing to have a child out of wedlock and out of rape. So the doctor said, think about the shame that's going to come upon the family having this child. Well, my mother said, God saved my life, and I'm not going to take the life away that's growing inside of me. My grandmother looked at her daughter, my mom, and said, I'll help you raise this child. And as much as the doctors tried to convince my grandparents not to go through with allowing my mom to have a baby, my grandmother stood strong on her faith, and the doctors kept telling my grandparents, you're too old. This child's going to be born with so many abnormalities because of all the medications she is on. And my grandmother said, I don't care how this child's born. I trust and have faith in God. And she continued to pray throughout the entire pregnancy. And by God's grace, I'm standing here before you today to share my testimony. And I know that life matters, and I know that I didn't always see it this way. Despite this miracle in my life, my childhood was anything but a miracle, being raised by a mom with mental disabilities. But I see it now, how God was with me throughout the entire time. And we now know scientifically that every child has its own unique fingerprint, its own voice box, its own DNA. From the moment of conception, it's already been encoded in the child's DNA, and it's separate from the mother's womb. So people that say, it's my body, that child is a unique individual. It amazes me that we spend millions of dollars trying to find life out there when there's life within the womb that we're killing here. And it just boggles my mind, because life is so precious, and to claim that we can just take that life because it's not a person is unscientifically invalid. You can't validate that. And a lot of people will say to me, yeah, but I believe in abortion in the cases of rape. Well, I wouldn't be here. Even in the cases of rape, that's an individual child. And that child is separate from the mother. And I'm so thankful that I wasn't punished for the sins of my father who raped my mother, because I'm my own person. I may be carrying some of his DNA, but I have my mom's too, and I'm an individual. I am not who he is. And so thank you so much for allowing me to share my story. And in my book, which I have out there, I have a couple of copies, I do share the story of how I bought the company that fired me. And I share more details on my story and my history. And it's all to the glory of God. So thank you so much for having me.